Hello, my name is Tolg, and I exist, therefore I think too much. I am reading Nietzsche Beyond Good and Evil. Oop, I pulled that out. Okay, I left off on points 26 and 27. I wrote a Fried because Fred is spelled fried. Given my difficulties with his name, should I just call him Fried? So, my head's cut off. Point 28 starts. What is most difficult to render from one language into another is the tempo of its style. I wonder if he means tone, because I have noticed that as well. If anybody watches anime, then, the tonality shift from Japanese to English is why in English dub is so awfully high pitched, because the tonality renders an intention that is different between the languages, and it's lost when you try to copy it. Doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, inference-wise. Which has its basis in the character of the race, or to speak more physiologically, in the average tempo of the assimilation of its nutriment. There are honestly meant translations, which as involuntary vulgarizations are almost falsifications of the original, the Bible. Merely because its lively and merry tempo, which overleaps and obviates all dangers in word and expression, could not also be rendered. I guess that's least like the temple, whoopsie daisy, least like the Bible and more like the, more ancient mythologies in the land where, I was reading, I think Robert Temple. That's where that came about. And the significance of how ancient cultures and the interpretation therein, they didn't have, I think, Sumerian and Assyrian, but more Hebrewic. Certain ones didn't have descriptive means by which they could identify the gender of these gods or goddesses, and so they were written in translation as a gender based on the strength or lack thereof. So if it was a strong character, it was assumed that they were a man, because misogynists wrote history. German is almost incapacitated for presto in his language. Consequently, also, as may be reasonably inferred, for many of the most delightful and daring nuances of free-spirited thought. I don't know. Didn't the Germanic peoples come out with a bunch of philosophers? Is this maybe just more Nietzsche hating his peers? And just as the buffoon and satyr are foreign to him in body and conscience, so Aristophanes and Petronius are untranslatable for him. I mean, maybe during, Nietzsche's time, 1860 to 1890, but scholars have existed forever, so I'm not entirely sure that I can appreciate his sentiment. Although, like I just said, people have continued to mistranslate historically based on their own perception of what it must mean. So, I don't know. Everything ponderous, viscous, and pompously clumsy, all long-winded and varying species of style are developed in profuse variety among Germans. So the sentiment is that Germanic philosophy is too wordy? Says the man who is very wordy when he feels emotionally inclined. Pardon me for stating the fact that even Goethe's prose, in its mixture of stiffness and elegance, is no exception. Stiffness would make it an exception, especially in it being prose. It would not necessarily be long-winded. But whatever. As a reflection of the good old time, to which it belongs, and as an expression of German taste at a time when there was still a German taste. Alrighty. Which was a Rococo taste. Wasn't Rococo France? In Moribus et Artibus? Sorry about that. Lessing is an exception, owing to his histrionic nature. Oh, okay, I didn't know Lessing was a last name. Histrionic nature, which understood much and was versed in many things. He who was not the translator of Bayle, to no purpose, who took refuge willingly in the shadow of Diderot and Voltaire, and still more willingly among the Roman comedy writers. Lessing loved also free spiritism in the tempo and flight out of Germany. And how could the German language, even in the prose of Lessing, imitate the tempo of Machiavelli, who in his Il Principe, the Prince, makes us breathe the dry, fine air of Florence and cannot help presenting the most serious events in a boisterous allegrissimo, perhaps not without a malicious artistic sense of the contrast he ventures to present, long, heavy, difficult, dangerous thoughts on the tempo of the gallop and of the best wantonest humor. That's a question. I reiterate that people, scholars, especially just generally in Europe, were supported in their career by finding someone of a higher stature or of wealth, if they were not lucky enough to be of this standing themselves in life, to support them. And so a lot of them had to produce work that would not insult those that were monetarily supporting them, would not make those that supported them feel lesser, but also put them into a position of feeling that their investment was valuable enough to promote themselves in a social sense in their hierarchical standing. So I'm not sure that it can be boiled down to a taste based purely on the genetic composition of an individual or even the cultural composition, more than it would be a consideration of the culture based on the ruling parties of the time and how these ruling parties framed their egos and what they framed their egos around, and if perhaps their egos were fragile. The more fragile the egos of the people that were supporting monetarily the scholars and philosophers, the more the philosophers had to be wordy. Finally, who would venture on a German translation of Petronius, who more than any great musician hitherto was a master of presto in invention, ideas, and words? What matter in the end about the swamps of the sick, evil world or of the ancient world, when, like him, one has the feet of a wind, the rush, the breath, the emancipating scorn of a wind, which makes everything healthy by making everything run? And with regard to Aristophanes, or is that Aristophanes? I don't know. That transfiguring complementary genius for whose sake one pardons all Hellenism for having existed, well, provided one has understood in its full profundity all that there requires pardon and transfiguration. There is nothing that has caused me to meditate more on Plato's secrecy and sphinx-like nature than the happily preserved petite faith that under the pillow of his deathbed there was found no Bible, nor anything Egyptian, Pythagorean, or Platonic, but a book of Aristophanes. How could even Plato have endured life, a Greek life, which he repudiated, without it in Aristophanes? Well, Greek being that they valued scholars very highly to very cult-like adoration. I believe it was Greek. If you did not give alms to the right gods for society at the time, then you could definitely be kicked out. Even if that was not of your belief system. I don't know Aristophanes, but I can say that if they did have personal taste that steered differently from society at the time, they had to hide it So insulting all of society may not be the most clever move, rather than insulting the system that created it. To try to go out of your way to not understand the system and to simply insult the peoples, I think is very limiting. And likewise, when you're going over history, to insult an entire period, Hellenism, again, is limiting in your understanding, because I think even if you do not agree with the practices of the time, like Greek, I don't necessarily enjoy, maybe it's not so much Grecian as it is Roman, the conquering, pillaging, and pirating, the extension into the south and the northern hemisphere of Africa they're in. Though I do appreciate, needing ties between countries, especially for trade, given the technology of the time. And that's my point. To write off an entire period and epoch in history simply because you dislike it is limiting your own personal understanding of what created today. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And maybe he's learning something from it, and just as expressing his dislike. I don't know. I just personally feel like Nietzsche, once he decided to dislike something, wrote it off entirely and did not pursue understanding for it. And then point 29, it is the business of the very few to be independent. Yeah. It is a privilege of the strong, definitely, and whoever tempts it, even with the best right, but without being obliged to do so, proves that he is probably not only strong, but also daring beyond measure. He enters into a labyrinth. He multiplies 1,000-fold the dangers which life in itself already brings with it, not the least of which is that no one can see how and where he loses his way, becomes isolated, and is torn piecemeal by some minotaur of conscience. Supposing such a one comes to grief, it is so far from the comprehension of men that they neither feel it nor sympathize with it, and he cannot any longer go back. He cannot even go back again to the sympathy of men. That, I'm sure Nietzsche is like the spirit animal. What is that? The best representation of the current phenomenon called male loneliness epidemic. There is a sentiment that I was thinking to myself earlier, and it was not like a well thought out thing. So it's merely a sentiment, and we'll see if I can rant about it. But it's to be alone is not necessarily the same as to be lonely. They are very different things. And I don't really care what gender you ascribe to, or how society has pitted you against whatever the fuck it has, as everybody is going to deal with the understanding of segregation that the US specifically, and I think, these models are followed elsewhere, Europe at large, the segregation between different groups of people's tribalism as a means of divide and conquer, provide circus and bread, and therein their conscience will be so entertained by the fuckery of ideologies and philosophy and politics that they won't pay attention to the fact that they are being steered like sheep into a direction without actual understanding of what the fuck they're doing by going in that direction. Thus, you have the male loneliness epidemic. Are you alone or are you lonely? And then, further from that, placing blame never gets anything fucking done. You ask an old farmer that, a hunter, a cowboy, anybody that, especially men, would claim shaped society, or at least were strong enough to handle it, they'll tell you placing blame doesn't fucking solve anything. You solve it yourself. That's an internal fucking struggle. You need to be able to properly communicate where you're at and what that means to anybody in your life. Your intentions and what you understand your needs versus your wants are, which also means you need to do a lot of internal work. What are your needs versus what your wants are? And to perfectly understand, or as perfect as you can get, manage the difference between the two. That your wants are not in fact your needs. I am happy to be alone. I feel lonely when I am surrounded by people that choose to not know me. That it would be more convenient for them that I fit a mold that is not necessarily exactly who I am. At the very least, I may not know myself perfectly, but I know full well when I don't fit a mold. And that feels very lonely. So, having said all of this, the split, the divide and conquer is misogyny versus feminine support. I refuse to call it feminism. First wave feminism believed in equity, believed that men suffered fully from misogyny, from the structure provided by a male-led society, just as much as anybody did. And that is to say that the pen you've been herded into as sheep is what you're suffering from now. Absolutely, white men have benefited from the society set up, but to a degree where the expectations set up for them have also provided expectation of self, which is a general mold. And I don't know why it developed this way, but in modern day, people have taken these general molds and understood them as specificities that ought to be perfectly meted out, perfectly met. So when I say that men suffer from a male-led society, I do not mean that it is equal to the suffering of anybody else, just that they absolutely do. Do you fit the expectations that are set out by society? How does that make you feel? Do you fit them? Do you not fit them? What is the price of fitting these expectations? What is the cost? And what is the value? What do you actually get from it? When you meet the expectations or you don't meet the expectations of society, do you feel fulfilled? What do you personally think would help you feel fulfilled? All of this exists beyond getting fucked and being fuckable. And that leads me into, do people want children because they're genuinely excited to see an entity grow into an influence of their own accord? Or do they want children because it'll distract them from the life that they have no control over? And an ounce of control in this world provides brevity. Is your problem not getting a wife, not getting a woman, not getting a partner? Or is your problem your own expectations for yourself? Go try to enjoy the moments rather than trying to own the whole picture all at once. Okay, good night. Have fun. Drink well, eat well, sleep well. Bye.